I'm Dean Safola, and this is the Azure Academy. So today I thought we would start a series on automation, and this is something that's going to become quite a long series because there are so many things to cover in terms of automation. So to get the basics of automation, we need to understand first the concept of infrastructure as code. So when dealing with things in the cloud, we have a set of resources that are out there that we can't touch, we can't hold, but we can interact with through a portal or programmatically. And it's that programmatic approach where we want to focus. So, infrastructure as a code is where we basically take the idea of building computers or data centers or applications, and we make some kind of machine readable definition file of what that should look like. And that represents all of the same kind of physical manifestations of that code that we want in the end, meaning we want servers. We want those servers to have networks. They should have storage. They should run applications. They should be able to communicate with each other. This is all infrastructure as code in the cloud. So in infrastructure as code, the other concept, which is a DevOps concept, and don't be scared off by DevOps if you're more on the infrastructure IT management side of things. DevOps is an approach to developing systems and maintaining them and iterating through them for continuous improvement. So when it comes to infrastructure as code in relation to building out our infrastructure in the cloud, this is going to help us to maintain our systems and our environment so we don't drift from our managed configurations. We don't get these weird snowflake systems that we then don't know how to manage properly. Things are produced in a methodical way where they are planned, designed, implemented, maintained, and then at the end of their life cycle, they're terminated and cleaned up. So all of this is managed through infrastructure as code in Azure. And to get us started with some of that, I want to look just briefly at our Azure documentation. So here is our Azure portal, and let's go to our documentation page. And you can find the stuff about the Azure Resource Manager under Products, Management Tools, Azure Resource Manager. So the resource manager is the ultimate engine that is behind everything that we do in Azure today. So with the resource manager, we have a interface that we can talk to and give it our code declarations. And as you see in our picture down here, we have these things that are called the provider REST endpoints, and then we have tools like the Azure portal or a command line like the Azure CLI, PowerShell, Terraform, Ansible. And we have other applications that help us to write code like Visual Studio or VS Code. You could also write these templates in something as simple as Notepad if you wanted to. The tools give you things like IntelliSense. So what in the world is IntelliSense? IntelliSense is when I'm writing code and I say I want a new Azure. Oh, see this box? This is IntelliSense. This is that box that pops up that helps you to finish what you're writing, as well as I could hit tab and I get tab completion, and that's also based on IntelliSense. So it helps you to write your code and helps you to know what syntax you need to be using and how to write these statements in such a way that the system is expecting them so that you can get in turn the thing that you want. So that brings us to a topic that we're going to cover quickly, and that is the difference between imperative and declarative code writing. So a imperative command would be something like what I did here in PowerShell. I want a new Azure RM resource group, and that group needs a name. And let's say that that name is test. Okay, and now we're going to give it a location, and let's say that that is East US. And then we hit enter. And then what happens? Well, the system then builds us a resource group called test in the East US region because this was imperatively declared. Give me this thing and make it over here and do it like this. Now, the declarative way is different than this. So in our Azure portal, if we look at some of our Azure Academy, look at our deployments, and let's look at one of these guys. So this was our AA 2019 jump server that we built, and that was the deployment procedure. And you've seen these things before, but this is the template that built it for us. Now we did this through the Azure portal, but it saves the deployments here so we can go back and reference them and do other things. So here, if we look at the tree that's given to us here, we have several different items, and these are parameters, variables, and resources. And there's more that could be here, but this is it for now. And in this section, we have a resource called a virtual machine resource. And that virtual machine was going to have an OS profile, and it's going to have some kind of hardware, which is the VM size and SKU, and some kind of storage profile, which is what operating system image this was based off of. And that disk was built from an image, and there were no data disks, and one network card was used, and it was using a diagnostic profile and an availability set, and it depended on these other resources being built first. Okay, now based on all of that declarative information, the system gets built. Now, in PowerShell, if you were going to do this, you would have to say, okay, so I need to build a availability set. So let's write the code for that first. And then I need to build a storage account so we can have diagnostics. Well, so let's build that first. And then we need to build a network card. Okay, so now we built that first. So we write them out in the code and we say build this, then this, then this, then this. And then after that, we know we've got all the pieces we need to build our VM and put it all together. But you don't always know all of that. Okay, if you're unfamiliar with the command to build a new VM, you may not know that you need all of those pieces to be built first. In Azure, in a declarative ARM template, we can say, I need this VM to have an availability set. Use this one. If it's not there, it'll go make it. If this was PowerShell and I said use this availability set and it didn't exist, it'd say you're out of luck, pal. So in a declarative document, we say it should have this and it should look like this. And then ARM figures out, does this thing exist? And if so, use it. If not, create it. Okay, so it does that extra work for you. It's kind of like in PowerShell or in other scripting languages. If you were to say, check this, and if it's this way, then do this, and if it's not this way, if else, do something different. Okay, ARM does all of that work for you. You just tell it, I want a VM, and I want that VM to be called this and to use this image, and you declare, I want this. ARM, go make it so. All right, so if you think of it that way, this is the make it so engine of the cloud. Okay, that's what ARM templates basically are. And each kind of section that's here has different things of importance. This is the parameters section, and a parameter is a input that has some kind of type associated with it. You can see here we have a lot of strings, but then we come down to our admin password, and this is a secure string because we want our passwords to be encrypted. Okay, there are many other kinds of inputs that you could use, but let's keep going. The one thing that I'll point out too is take this input parameter for a second here, auto shutdown time zone. Now, there is no magic formula that means auto shutdown time zone equals anything. This is a input parameter. You could call this Mama's apple pie. The reason why we use a name like auto shutdown time zone is because that means something somewhere else in the document. We have a public IP address type because in the section of the document where we create the public IP address, we need to know what the type is, okay? Because that's related to a function that's related to that resource. So you want to make your parameters as specific as possible so that everybody else can know what it is that you need to be put into this field. Secondly, we have this variable section. Now, what is a variable? So a variable, think of it like this way. It's a container that holds information that you can call on at a later time. So in the concept of PowerShell, if we were to make a variable, we could make one with a $sign, and then we say new. Okay, so this is going to be a new whatever. Let's make this a name for another resource group. We'll say that this is called Billy. And then let's make another one called Fred. And we'll say that this is East US. So now if we were to write our imperative statement of new Azure RM resource group and we give it a name, this name is the input parameter, and we give it the variable of new. Oh, got a little anxious there. And we give it a location of Fred. Now, that doesn't really make a lot of sense compared to what we did before. Name was test and location was East US. Here, location is Fred. What does that mean? Well, it doesn't really mean anything to anyone except me. Now, if we run this, it's still going to work, and we get a resource group called Billy in the East US region. But you want to make these things make sense. That's why your name has to make sense as an input parameter, location has to make sense so that we know what it is you're asking for. And then when you make variables, the variables should make sense because you always want to write your code knowing somebody else is going to be reading this and trying to figure out what it is that you did. Okay, whether that's a colleague at the same place that you work or you're looking at templates that somebody else has developed. Okay, so you want to write your stuff as clear as possible so that other people can understand what it is that you're talking about. And also because, it makes it easier on you too. If you're talking about computer names and admin usernames and passwords, if you had these inputs, parameters here called Jacob and Ferrari and Smith and Wesson, you wouldn't necessarily know what they were 6 months from now or 6 years from now when you looked at this template. So it makes it easier on everybody. All right, enough of that. Moving on. So in Azure, we have a bunch of ways to deploy templates and to help you in writing templates. So for that, we're going to look at two sections in our all services up here. There is a item called templates, which I've starred. So that shows up on my little sidebar, and we'll open that up. And this is where you can write templates and store them inside the Azure portal. So if I pull up this one here, this is to build a Cisco firewall appliance. And so we have a bunch of different kinds of input parameters, whole lot of them as you can see. And then after that, then we have a variable section, which has a whole lot of stuff. And you see this looks very different than the last one that we looked at. And then you go further down, and now we're building resources. And each one of these resources has their own unique bunches of information that you need. And this all looks very long and very complicated. And boy, look at all those letters on the page. How am I ever going to do that? Well, we don't start with something super complex. We start with something simple. And the easiest way to start with something simple is something that's easy to understand and already done for you. So in this top search bar, we're going to type the word deploy, if I can spell, and it's deploy a custom template. Now, this is the part in the portal where we are linked to our Azure GitHub repository where we have something called the QuickStart templates. Now, I'm going to show you what that is. So we say GitHub Azure QuickStart templates. And this is where we store in the public GitHub repository more than 700 templates to help you to get started. Okay, and we list them out as the level of difficulty. So level 100, 101, you go down quite a ways and you get down to 201 and then 301 and then you get into some more specialized stuff. But looking at it this way, it may be a little hard to find exactly what you want. We made this searchable box that links to all 700 templates that you can find very easily what you need. So if we said, I need to build a SQL always on cluster. Well, there you go. There's a template right there for it. Or what if I needed a NFS cluster? Or perhaps I needed to build a new domain. Well, here I can build a domain controller or a high availability set of 2 domain controllers. Or maybe I just need to build a simple Linux VM. We can say simple Linux VM. Or maybe one with accelerated networking. So we can click on this and hit select template. And that's going to bring us to this screen. Now, this is where we have the front end of the Azure portal serving as a way to make input parameters and deploy a resource. So here you can select what resource group you want this to deploy to. There's our Billy group. And then you can give it a name and a password. And then you can give it a DNS prefix, something, doesn't matter. And then you can give it a location. Now, this looks kind of funny. This, again, doesn't look like East US to me. So this is a template function, which we'll get into a little bit later. But basically, a template function means that we're using some logic in the template to make your life easier. So this function is called resource group, which ironically enough has to do with resource groups. And it's saying select the resource group where we're deploying, which is Billy in the East US, and give us the location for Billy and make that our input for our location to build this new VM. So it's select the resource group and then give us its location. So it's taken Billy from the East US and it's going to populate that information in this field for us. Okay, and then you hit the checkbox here agreeing to the conditions above, which basically amounts to you're using your subscription credits or you're going to use funds to pay for building this resource in the cloud. And then you would hit purchase. And what that's going to do is execute this template. And this template has the input parameters we saw, admin username, password, DNS prefix, Ubuntu version, location. There's that funny function that we looked at. And there are some different kinds of input values here. So we have different types, and we have strings and secure strings. And then we have this construct here for allowed values and default values, which pre-select a allowed value for you. And then we have some metadata to help you understand what stuff is. But these things don't just exist here in the template and have no other meaning. They're here. When you mouse over these little tooltips, that's the metadata description. When you do a secure string, that's going to encrypt the code, the text that you put in there. Okay, when you do those allowed values, that gives you a drop-down selection to make people's lives easier. Instead of having to know that it's 14.04.5-LTS, you've put it here for them already. You're making their lives easier. Okay, the other side of this is that we can store these templates. So inside here, we can add this to our templates that we had by doing a copy and then going back to our template section, and we're going to hit add. We're going to give this a name. We'll say simple Linux, and oh, no spaces. And then we say here simple Linux VM with network and storage. We hit OK. And then it gives us this outline, which we can highlight and delete everything because we're going to paste our code. And now I've saved this. Okay, and there is our simple Linux VM. And if we click on that here, we can edit the template, change anything that we want in this template. In fact, let's do that. Let's hit edit, and we'll edit our template here. And then we'll change our allowed values. We'll take these guys away. And then let's not take all of them away. Let's take these two away. There we go. And then we'll hit OK there. And we'll hit save. And then we'll hit deploy. And when we hit deploy, it looks very much identical to the last one, but there's only two values here now because we removed the others. So you can customize the templates. So it's a good idea to start off by building something or building something in the portal yourself, taking the template, bringing it in here, looking at it, just breaking it down, figuring out what's in there, and then customizing it. And that's a good way to start learning about new resources and building out templates. So you can see the work that others have done and then build on that. So the other part of templates that I wanted to look at quickly is Visual Studio. Now, Visual Studio, there is a free version of Visual Studio that you could use. And you can find that if we go back to our portal here on download Visual Studio, and there's a link right here. So you can download the community edition of Visual Studio, which as far as ARM templates are concerned is exactly the same as using the enterprise version of Visual Studio. So you download this and install it, running it as administrator, and then when you're done, you end up with Visual Studio, and we can run all of our ARM templates from here. I'm going to do a new project. And the project that I'm going to do is a Azure Resource Group based project. Okay, and we're going to just leave the default values for everything else here, and we'll hit OK. Now in Visual Studio, kind of like the QuickStart templates, we have a bunch of preset stuff to help you to build things. So right now we're just going to start with blank. So we're going to make a custom one. Okay, so this is Visual Studio. This is our project. We're going to start off by looking at our Azure deployment template. And here we have just a blank template. Well, great. Now what do we do? I don't know how to write this code. Well, I mean, you always could just insert the code that we got from the QuickStart template. And now we've got a whole lot to start from. I want to start from scratch. So what I can do is right click over here on resources and I can add new resources. And now I've got all the resources that are listed here to choose from. So I could build a Ubuntu VM. And let's just call this test123. And we'll take a storage account, we'll create a new one. We'll call this test123 Linux 0 or 91. We'll hit add, and then we'll create a new virtual network. We'll call this test123-vnet, and then we'll hit add. Wow, look at all that it did for us. So now We have a bunch of input parameters. I mean, look at all this. And it just did that for us, and I didn't know anything about how to write all of that. And look at all that. So it gave us a parameter for our storage account, and it gave us different types of allowed values, and it gave us a place for our username and for a password using a secure string automatically using these couple versions of Ubuntu that I can choose from. It made some variables for us. It made some resources to build us a storage account, to build us a virtual network, a network card, and a virtual machine using everything that's needed to build this. And it just did it for me through a couple clicks. Well, let's see what else I can do. Let's add some more resources. How about um, let's make a web app, so I can make my own web pages. Let's call this my web page 1, and we'll say that this is a app service plan of new app plan. And there we go. Now we've added that stuff. So you didn't know anything about how to write a website before, but there you go. All of that through Visual Studio made very, very easy. Now, this is where we start, and I'll give you a sneak preview of the type of things that you can do. Okay, so here is a bunch of templates that I've written for how to deploy SAP environments in the cloud. You can see I've got a lot of stuff here. Okay, and I'm not going to open all this and show you all this stuff right now, but suffice it to say that you can build entire environments, whole applications, whole enterprises using templates, and you can make this stuff be very intricate and complex. All right, so you can start off with the basics, work your way up to how to make things all work together and make different pieces of things all function together. Here's another series of templates that I did for building basic environments. You're going to do a brand new build for somebody. And how do we manage that environment using some governance policies? How do we write all of the permissions for what can be used in our environment? How do we make our network, our storage, our compute, building the basic shared resources of domain controllers, DNS servers, file servers, remote desktop infrastructure, jump servers, and then on top of that, building your applications. And all of this done through infrastructure as code. Okay? You can literally build everything in the cloud using infrastructure as code, right down to the permissions that you grant to people. So everything can be done this way. Everything should be done this way. And there's nothing wrong with using the portal, but the portal is a manual one-click operation. With a template, I can deploy an entire enterprise, and it doesn't take very long at all. Okay, this is the power of automation in the cloud. So join me in the next episode of this series where we're going to get into a little more of writing templates in Visual Studio, as well as reusing things that we've already deployed, and we'll build some simple web servers, and I'll show you how we can build servers using some load balancers and make our services highly available. And then we'll see some failover between the two different web servers, and we'll do this with the portal to start, and then we'll do it with the automation so you can see how the one translates to the other. All right, so we'll see you next time.